I have testified that, yes.
Now, the coroner previously testified that the shot, first the through and through shot, was in a downward angle.
Objection to state's testimony.
Actually, Your Honor, I don't believe it does.
Ask your question one more time.
Sure.
Please.
The coroner has previously testified in this courtroom that during the autopsy that the shot that was through the chin and out the neck was in a downward angle, not in an upward angle. But you've testified that it was in an upward angle.
Objection to state's testimony.
Mr. Terry, I believe that from what I recall the coroner saying that it was more front to back at a slight angle, the one through the mouth.
I believe he testified at a slight downward angle, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, on the day of the shooting, you concealed the distinctive aspects of your motorcycle that you were going to use. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You bought bulky clothes that would make it difficult for someone to be able to identify you, your body type that you were going to wear to the scene when you shot Robert Lamone. Is that right?
Yes, Sabrina had encouraged me to do that.
When did she encourage you to do that, sir?
During our planning of the shooting of her husband, she was concerned that I would be recognized by anyone in that area, potential witnesses. So it was with her that I discussed concealing the distinctive aspects of my motorcycle. With her, I discussed wearing clothes that I'd never worn before. And it was with her that I discussed the mask and facial concealment.
When did these discussions take place?
In the summer of 2014, leading up to the point when I shot him. After our poisoning attempt, she knew that it was my plan to carry it out myself, confront him, and to shoot him myself.
Well, did you actually discuss with her you were going to shoot him?
Yes, I did.
And, of course, you've got evidence that these discussions actually took place, other than your testimony, right, sir?
I bring no evidence into the courtroom, sir. That's the sheriff's department's job.
Well, other than your testimony, are there any text messages between you and Sabrina discussing the murder of her husband?
Text messages, no, because we had discussed not leaving traces like that.
Are there any notes that she wrote that you have retained with regards to her being involved in the planning of her husband?
Could you repeat that question?
Sure. Are there any notes that you have in your possession that were actually written by Sabrina Limon that shows that she was involved in the discussions to kill her husband?
I'm not sure. I've been here the last 3 years, so I'm not sure what things are still in my old residence or possession, but none that I'm aware of that I can present at this point. I'm in custody, sir.
And these emails you say that existed between you and Sabrina regarding poisoning her husband, those don't exist anymore either. Is that right?
I can't speak to their existence because I also can't speak to the investigation of Mr. Meyer or whoever's in charge of pulling old data.
Certainly, if there were such emails, they would have been presented through you, since you purportedly are one of the authors of those emails, right?
I would say I'm probably not a very good judge of what would have been presented at this case because there's a lot of things that haven't been presented that I would have thought would have been presented. So I'm not the person to ask that.
Well, we've heard all these recorded phone calls between you and Ms. Limon during the time after her husband's murder where you're talking to her. Certainly, we listened to all of those, right?
I'm sorry you had to. Yes, sir.
Okay. We've listened to every one of those that Mr. Smith thought was relevant with regards to presenting his case, right?
I can't speak for how Mr. Smith presents his case.
Sir, we've listened to every one of those calls that he felt was important enough for you to play before this court for you to listen and comment on. Is that right?
I believe so. It would seem that way.
So certainly it would make sense logically if these emails were in his possession and he had them available where there are discussions between you and Ms. Lamone to kill her husband, that certainly he would have presented them at this point in time, would he not, sir? Through you.
Arguably, I would say he hasn't felt compelled to, so.
So let's see. You've concealed your identity. You've concealed your motorcycle. You've provided Sabrina with a burner phone so you and she can purportedly communicate without the police being aware of it. Is that right?
That's correct.
You then discarded a number of objects after the homicide occurred. Is that right?
That's right.
You also then changed clothes on the way back to your home from where the homicide occurred. Is that right?
That's correct.
All of these things to conceal your involvement in this case. Is that right?
As previously discussed with Sabrina, that was our plan, and that's what I did.
That's what you did to hide your identity. Correct, sir?
I think you've made that point, sir.
That's what you did to hide your identity, is it not, sir?
It would seem obvious at this point.
Now, with regards to the phone calls that you made, or between you and Sabrina, you claim now, 3 years later, that you were aware at the time the police were listening in on your phone calls. Is that right?
Could you rephrase that question?
Sure. You now claim 3 years later that you knew that the police were listening to your calls with Sabrina back in 2014. Is that right?
Objection lacks foundation. Your Honor, can we have a sidebar, please?
Yes.
1 second, please.
By the way, you've been very lucky. We haven't had a whole lot of sidebars. Legal issues come up that we need to handle outside of your presence. It's much easier for us to step into my chambers, which is a fancy word for my office, you see. And we go back there and we work it out real quick, okay? So that's what we're doing back there. We're not practicing our Tetris or discussing the ball games. Okay, we're working. All right, Mr. Terry, please.
Yes. Mr. Hearn, you're now testified that you were aware in 2014 that the police were listening in on your conversations with Sabrina. Is that correct?
I had the thought that they might have been.
And yet you kept talking to Sabrina on the phone about the case, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you kept questioning her with regards to the, how would I put it, advances in the investigation that the police were making. Would that be accurate?
Objection misstates the testimony.
Can you rephrase that?
Sure. Did you, during the course of these conversations, ask Sabrina about, or discuss with Sabrina, the information she was getting about the investigation from Detective Meyer?
It certainly came up as a frequent topic of our conversation because she was both nervous and prolific with providing me that information.
Well, and you questioned her about it also, did you not?
I'm sorry, but there was likely some questions posed, but I'm not thinking of any specifically. I mean, we all heard the wiretaps.
Yes, we did, sir. Now, during the course of those conversations, a number of times you told Sabrina things about what Detective Meyer was doing that made you distrust him. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And these were things where Sabrina was calling you and asking you what the significance of some of the information she was getting from Meyer was. Is that right?
Overruled. You can answer.
It seems that she was curious about potential advances in the investigation and what Mr. Meyer might be, what his true motives might be for some of his statements to her.
And she was trying to understand, because you had some training in investigation and law enforcement, she was trying to understand what these things meant.
That's the thing.
Well, she asked you about things about DNA, right?
She told me that they had found DNA.
And she asked you questions about exactly what that meant. Is that right?
If I remember correctly.
And during the course of those conversations that we've heard, you also were telling her what to say to Detective Meyer, were you not?
I'm sure the jury all had a discerning ear in deciphering that there were times I offered suggestions of what to say, and certainly we were agreeing upon a line of rhetoric or narrative to speak with Mr. Meyer about. And certainly the wiretaps are only one small part of what was discussed.
You told her what to tell Detective Meyer, correct, sir?
No, sir, I offered suggestions.
You told her when to call him back or not call him back, did you not, sir?
Your Honor, I'm going to object vague as to time.
You understand?
I understand the question. I'm trying to recall when exactly I might have told her when to call him back or not. I don't have a direct recollection of my exact words. I certainly offered her suggestions, much like her suggestions to disguise my motorcycle or disguise my appearance when I shot her husband. So if you want to say told her to do it, I didn't force her to say anything to Mr. Meyer, much like she didn't force me to make the bad choices I made.
Exhibit 52A, page 15, lines 3, 12. Hearn. I almost feel like he'll just be like, quote, oh yeah, it's Jonathan Hearn. Do you know Jonathan Hearn? Because he's our suspect right now, close quote, or whatever. And then we'll just see if he'll do Lamone. What do I say? Well, yeah, I mean, this is Hearn. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, we don't want to lie at that point. I feel like he might be lying about details and stuff that would be, if this is the route they're going, I think it's kind of unavoidable. So he just wants to see if you will deny knowing me, because then he'll probably try to say, yeah, she, Jonathan did it, and she's just covering for him, so we're going to get her for, something too. Isn't that something you said to Sabrina and tell what to say? what to do with regards to dealing with Detective Meyer on November 18th of 2014, sir?
Mr. Terry, thank you for refreshing my memory. It seems that would definitely be a strong suggestion.
Page 18, same exhibit. Line 6 through 12. Hearn, do you have an idea of what time you're thinking of calling the detective? Lamone, what time do you think I should? Hearn, I don't know. I was going to say the earlier the better, just because you are. I think it's clearly they're just trying to say it's me and trying to just get information out from you and just kind of jerk you around. But I don't want to just unintelligible from there. Were you again telling Sabrina what she should do with regards to calling Detective Meyer?
The syntax makes it very difficult there because she asked me in context, what do you think I should do? So, of course, my response to that, though it was very fragmented and unintelligible, I guess could be conceived or construed to be telling her what to say to the detectives. But also, it's a two-way conversation. It wasn't me perpetrating some narrative on her.
Mr. Hearn, I know you want to go back to your script. It's a yes or no question. Would you mind answering the question yes or no when it's asked?
What's the objection, Mr. Hearn?
System.
Isn't that what you said to Sabrina on November 18th of 2014, sir?
It sounds to be.
Now let's go back a little bit. All of these efforts that you and Sabrina talked about, according to you, with regard to trying to alleviate suspicion from you, and I guess you're saying from her. Is that right?
Certainly I was taking measures to alleviate suspicion from her.
And from yourself. I mean, you disguised yourself, right?
Of course.
She wasn't there when you built the silencer, right?
No, she was not.
She was not there when you bought the clothes that you wore the day you murdered her husband, right?
No, she was not.
She wasn't there when you disguised your motorcycle to hide your identity in another, at least with regards to your vehicle. Is that right?
I was on the phone with her describing that I was concealing the appearance of my motorcycle, as has been previously testified to in that lengthy conversation I had with her just before going out and killing Rob.
Well, let me ask you this. On the days that Rob was working, or the times he was working, those are the times where you were either seeing each other or communicating with each other over the phone. Is that right? During the entire course of your relationship, right?
Often it was when he was at Tehachapi, just because that was a pretty sure or secure situation for us to be able to rendezvous. But there were also times when she would simply tell him that she had to go to work and would come over to my house, or we would meet in various different configurations. So it wasn't that he was always at work when we spoke.
Oftentimes you communicated with her when her husband was at work, right?
Certainly.
Okay. And oftentimes on the days that say he was at Tehachapi, obviously he was gone for 12 hours during that time frame, right? And you knew that. Right?
Plus commuting time.
Okay. And those would be days where you guys could talk or see each other, right?
They were.
Okay. And on that particular day, you spoke in the morning a couple of times, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But she wasn't actually with you when you were disguising your motorcycle, right?
Physically, no.
She wasn't there when you loaded your backpack up with a change of clothes, right?
No, sir.
And she wasn't with you when you went and shot her husband, right?
Again, physically, of course not.
And she wasn't with you when you disposed of some of the evidence against you, is that right?
She was not with me.
And she wasn't with you when you did your scouting trip in May of 2014 to go to locate the warehouse building for BNSF, right?
Other than providing me all the direction she knew that day and speaking about it afterwards on the phone, no, she wasn't physically with me in the truck that day. We were speaking on the phone.
That was after you'd already gotten to Hatchapee, though, that you then called her from your phone. Is that right?
No, sir. We were on the phone as I was coming down south, and then I let her know that I was going to be turning around and trying to see if I could identify the complex. And then once I had found it, we spoke again.
And again, the only evidence of these purported conversations with Sabrina is your testimony, right?
I'm not sure, sir.
Well, did you record the conversations you had with Sabrina?
I did not.
So is there anyone else who was present when you supposedly had these conversations with Sabrina when you were doing your scouting trip?
I guess Sabrina could tell the truth.
My question was, sir, was there anyone else with you when you did your scouting trip in May of 2014, sir?
Hopefully it's abundantly clear I was by myself and had spoken to her extensively on the phone, sir.
Well, you spoke to her extensively on the phone all the time, though, right?
Frequently.
Yeah. In other words, you and she would engage in long conversations on a regular basis. Isn't that true?
Certainly.
So it wasn't unusual for you to talk to her for extensive lengths of time on the phone, right?
That's true.
Now, the last phone call that Mr. Smith played from the November 18th, Sabrina was looking at the video again, right? From the gas station?
She seemed concerned by that, yes, sir.
Well, you were concerned too, were you not?
Oh, with what respect?
Well, throughout the conversation, you kept saying that the police had gotten just a random video of you from a gas station, right?
Yes, sir.
You were trying to convince her that the police were trying to set you up, right?
No, sir. That aspect of the conversation was directly to cover for her so that she would not lie to detectives and become the scope of the investigation. If you'll remember in context, I was encouraging her not to fret over the possibility that they have an actual video of me, and told her it's irrelevant where they actually got the video. That way, if Detective Meyer confronted her directly, asking her with a picture of me, that way she wouldn't incriminate herself by lying and saying that she didn't know me or something along those lines.
Didn't you tell her to tell the police that there was no way that you would have killed her husband?
I offered that certainly as a suggestion for her to tell Mr. Meyer. Yes, sir.
Because a person like you wouldn't commit a murder, right?
That was certainly an aspect of our alibi.
You keep saying alibi, sir. Obviously, you don't understand what an alibi is. What alibi is you're at another location when something occurred, but that wasn't what you were presenting, was it?
Deviation from the truth, obviously, to portray ourselves, our situation, and our involvement as being how should I put this? To portray to investigators that it was something we would not have done.
Or you wouldn't have done, right?
Or I wouldn't have done.
Because when you were telling her that, you were telling her, I know Jonathan Hearn, and he would never have done something like this, right? Isn't that what you said to her, to tell the police?
I believe I offered that as a suggestion a couple times, actually. Yes, sir.
Now, I think at the fairly early on in your testimony on direct, you said that you're not a very emotional person. Is that right?
In my previous testimony, I was speaking about the time of December of 2013, and that in the time prior to that, I hadn't cried or showed much emotion in probably, well, quite some time. I wasn't speaking of myself currently or giving a characterization of myself only of that time period, sir.
Okay, so what you're saying is you now are in touch with your emotions as a person. Is that right?
No, sir, you just embellished on what I said.
My question then is, sir, are you saying now that you are able to express your emotions better than you were in December of 2013?
I think it's probably pretty obvious. I'm a pretty emotionally guarded person, and I certainly don't sensationalize anything I'm saying. I'm a pretty objective person, if that's what you're inquiring about.
Well, you've described fairly clinically how you went about murdering her husband throughout the course of your testimony. Have you not?
Sir, I worked in emergency services for 6 years, and I've seen more death and destruction and guts and decapitated people and microwaved infants, and I've seen a lot of things. And I apologize if I can, if it's disturbing to some people that I can speak about something horrible like killing a man with a straight face and with an objective appearance, but there's some parts of life that I've learned to just kind of analyze absent emotion, especially as a paramedic, because that's contributed to literally countless lives that I've helped and been able to save because I wasn't emotionally entangled, but engaging my patients in a way to benefit them. So certainly I don't want to say I'm jaded or that I'm I'll suffice it to say I'm emotionally guarded and fairly objective, sir.
Now, your friend Parker also, in his discussion with the police, called you a bit of a ladies' man. Would that be accurate?
I've not heard about Parker's characterization of me, sir.
Well, would that be accurate? That you're a bit of a ladies' man?
I would say there's a broad spectrum from playboy to something more conservative that maybe some women have been attracted to. I certainly have dated many women.
It has been previously marked as defense exhibit Q.
Q, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, John.
Quote that. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir.
That's the article entitled Silver Lakes that you wrote. Is that right?
It is, sir.
Okay. And again, you referenced this woman Jen in the article. I know you said you changed the name. Is that right?
To protect her identity, yes, sir.
Okay. And at about the same time you were writing this article, you were also seeing a woman named Jen, right? Or Jennifer?
No, sir. This was written in 2012. Correction. Probably late 2012 or early. Or early 2013, I believe. But it was with reference. The account itself is with respect to a call that I went on in. This would have been 2010.
Second page, I'll start at the bottom of the first page. You write in your article, quote, firefighters' wives and girlfriends are by nature strong women whose dedication, courage, and poise often goes unnoticed in the wake of the heroics of their husbands and lovers. Is that what you wrote?
It appears to be.
And that was the relationship you had with this woman whose name you changed to Jen. Is that right? Not so much a wife, but a girlfriend or lover? Is that right?
With respect to what you just read, sir?
Yes, sir.
No, sir. That was an objective assessment of firefighters' wives and girlfriends. That was not pertinent only to her. If you'd finish the paragraph, there was more specific information about her.
When you're referencing Jen and the 32 messages, that's a woman you were seeing who was your girlfriend or lover at the time you wrote the article. Is that correct, sir?
I think it might be characterized best as just a girl who interpreted every pause in my communication as indefinite abandonment. No, not my girlfriend or necessarily my lover.
So, if I understand you correctly, she felt like you were abandoning her, and that's why you wrote about this. All the time, she felt like you were abandoning her. Is that right?
Did you not understand that?
Is that what you're saying, sir?
Are you asking me about what's written, or are you asking me
I'm
what I'm
asking
saying?
you about what you wrote. Didn't you? You indicated that she's always worried, based on the 32 messages, that she's always worried about you abandoning her, is what you said. Is that right?
With respect to what's written, it would certainly seem a symptom of our relationship.
Okay. You would agree that during the time that you were involved in the relationship with Sabrina, you were conflicted over your relationship because you were involved in an adulterous relationship. Would you not agree with that?
I would certainly agree with that.
Okay. And was part of that as a result of your upbringing and your faith?
Yeah, I would reasonably infer that.
You know you'd reasonably infer it, sir. I'm asking if that was in fact the case.
Well, I was conflicted, so there were many aspects of conflict. Some simply moral and ethical, some just the norms of society, some aspects of my faith. So certainly it was a part of it, I guess you could say.
Well, didn't you at one point make the following statement? Well, let me back that up. I'll show you what you previously marked as Defense Exhibit J, which is one of your handwritten notes. Bottom of the page. Didn't you write, I sinned. I confess. Isn't that what you wrote?
I sinned, I am confessing.
So with regards to that, obviously your faith had a lot to do with your conflicts that you had with being involved with a married woman. Is that right?
This statement does not develop that, no, sir.
Well, in what way other than the being involved with a married woman were you sinning with regards to your relationship with Sabrina?
Could you repeat that question, sir?
Sure. with regards to your relationship to Sabrina, in what other way were you sinning other than being involved with a married woman?
That was pretty much it as far as Sabrina.
So when you write that, and you say you're confessing your sins, and then you sin, it's in relationship to being involved with a married woman. Right?
If my memory serves me correctly, I don't recall exactly the context of that note, but that would certainly be a great part of it.
I'll ask you to read the entire note so that you understand the context of the note.
Thank you, Mr. Terry.
Wasn't this a note you wrote after Rob Lamone found out for the first time in March of 2013 that you were involved with Sabrina?
Yes, sir, it was.
So the sin you're speaking of in your confession has to do with being involved with a married woman, correct?
Certainly.
So obviously you felt very strong, how do I put it? Well, I shouldn't say strong feelings, but at least a very powerful response with regards to your conduct and being involved with Sabrina, who was a married woman.
I did, and that's why I pursued getting Rob's number and speaking with him and apologizing to him, and it did affect me. I can't portray myself to be successful against sin. I can't portray myself to be anything but a flawed man who then compromised very, very much after that. But it doesn't negate the fact that it did affect me then, and I certainly did feel guilt and regret over it.
And isn't it true that even a woman, according to your studies of the Bible, even a woman who's divorced from her husband is still committing adultery if she remarries to another man?
I haven't studied divorce and remarriage in the Bible, sir.
I'm sure you know this Bible much better than I do, sir. Are you familiar with Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 through 32?
I may have read it before. I'm sure I've read it before.
Well, you've been reading the Bible your entire life, have you not, sir?
I've certainly been exposed to the Bible my entire life, and I'm sure you'll find, speaking with people who've been exposed to the Bible, that many of them don't believe it, and some of them don't necessarily agree on some of the dialectical positions that are often taken. So as far as divorce and remarriage, I really haven't studied it to any great degree. I know there's several mentions throughout the Bible of different arrangements and when divorce is appropriate, when divorce is not appropriate, but I'm certainly no expert on that.
Well, again, you've studied the Bible, you're familiar with the Scriptures, right?
Familiar, yes, sir.
Okay. And you've studied this, sir. I mean, you've studied in your entire life, right?
Mr. Terry, the conflict I'm having in answering this question is, to me, study is something engaging in eagerly. So I certainly haven't studied the scriptures with that respect, or in that respect, my entire life. I've been exposed to them. I've been familiar with parts of them.
Previously marked and admitted as defense exhibit K. Aren't those a number of chapters within the Bible that you identified to talk to Sabrina about reading?
I don't remember if I was going to speak with Sabrina about these or not, sir.
Doesn't it say above those different chapters within the Bible that you said, or you wrote, ask Sabrina, when you do bad, why do you do it? To be popular, to be liked / loved, to show rebellion, want to know more, than you should, ? Were those passages in regards to those questions you were going to ask Sabrina?
You'll notice 2 delineating lines between the passages and those questions, and those were not directly related to those questions.
So the 2 lines means you weren't going to ask Sabrina or address those portions of the Bible to Sabrina. Is that what you're saying?
No, sir. Just that they were not directly related to those questions you just mentioned.
So what you're saying is never during your discussions with Sabrina did you ever talk about the fact that if a man and woman are divorced and she remarries, that the man she's marrying, the second husband, and is committing adultery with his wife?
I don't believe we ever had that conversation.
Never occurred. Is that right?
Not that I recall.
Now, you testified in connection with the last phone call you had with Sabrina that we listened to on November 18th, that at that point you were so guilty and so racked with guilt that you were prepared to confess your involvement. Is that right?
You're saying I told Sabrina that?
No, I'm saying that's what you testified to in connection with that last phone call when Mr. Smith asked you some follow-up questions. That you were so conflicted and so guilty or overcome with your guilt that you were prepared or you were ready to confess your involvement in killing Rob Lamone. Is that right?
No, sir. I believe I said that over the course of the wiretaps, you heard a systematic breaking down of Sabrina and I, and that by the time of those last phone calls on November 18th, we were very, very near, or at least I was very, very near to being brought to acknowledge my sin and recognize it for what it was. With respect to the actual time of the conversation, I still was not, the time of those wiretaps, I was not yet ready to fully divulge everything, but looking back, I was very, very near.
You're very near to confessing that you killed Rob Lamone?
And that it was wrong. Yes, sir.
And, of course, shortly after you were arrested, that's when you confessed your involvement in this, right? In other words, within the first month. That's when you confessed all your involvement to this crime. Is that right? In the first month.
There's aspects of your answer. Yes, first of all, yes. There's aspects of your answer that are delving into privileged conversations I've had, though.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Did you ever come forward and talk to Detective Meyer in that first month and tell him that you had done this?
I did not speak with Detective Meyer in the first month.
How about the second month?
As with the following months.
Well, following months, in other words, it took you 2.5 years almost before you confessed your involvement to Detective Meyer. Is that right?
I'm going to be very tactful in how I'm approaching this, just because it is some privileged conversations. But as far as the first time Detective Meyer and I sat across from each other and spoke to my involvement was just recently. It was only early this year. But as I'm sure you know, working in the courts, there's gears that begin to turn long before that. And I guess I was not familiar with the layers upon layers of hearings and other things that one goes through to get to a certain point. So I can't speak for the legal process, but I know that I acknowledged my wrong within days of being arrested.
Not to Detective Meyer, though, right?
As I said.
My question, which you didn't answer, was prior to January of 2017, did you tell Detective Meyer about your involvement in this crime, sir?
Me personally tell him? No.
Okay. And even when you did tell him about your involvement in this crime, you knew that it could not, any statements you made to him could never be used against you if the case were to go to trial, right?
Those were some stipulated terms that I was made aware of.
And by the time that you had spoken to Detective Meyer with regards to this case, without getting into any privileged communication between you and your lawyer, I'm sure that he'd gone over all the evidence against you with you, right?
Your Honor, objection.
Well, are you talking about Detective Meyer
I'm just asking whether, without any type of disclosure of any privileged communications, had you discussed the case extensively with your lawyer?
We have a sidebar.
Yes.
1 second, please.
lawyers back there. So go on. All right, Mr. Terry, please.
I'll rephrase the question. Mr. Hearn, would it be safe to say that by the time you spoke to Detective Meyer in 2017, you were fairly familiar with what evidence they had against you?
I was fairly familiar with what evidence they had against me, sir.
And that was from the time that you were arrested in November of 2014 until January of 2017 before you spoke to Detective Meyer about your involvement in this case.
Yes, sir.
Now, earlier we talked about it fairly extensively. I want to go back to it a little bit. You said at the end of 2013 and into 2014, when you purportedly had made the decision to kill Rob Lamone, that there was a, I think you put it, the relationship between Sabrina and Rob had, I think you said, or at least your discussions with her about Rob had turned dark. Is that right?
That was speaking specifically to, like, killing him, plans to kill him, yes.
But you had indicated that it appeared to you that Sabrina no longer wanted to be with Rob. Is that right?
She certainly made that clear to me.
And you said that whenever you spoke about her relationship with Rob, it was the conversation was dark. Is that right?
I don't believe I said whenever we spoke about Rob the conversation was dark, but we were planning to kill her husband, and so there was many aspects of our conversation that delved into our justifications for that, and specifically all the reasons she was presenting that it would be ultimately what was best. So the many reasons I've given are reasons that she informed me of. I think I spoke to those previously when Mr. Smith asked me.
Judge Exhibit next in order S as in Sierra.
Let me approach.
Please.
Mr. Hearn, I ask you to examine Defense Exhibit S.
Yes, sir.
Is that a letter you wrote to Sabrina shortly after you murdered her husband?
I guess it could be characterized as that.
Well, is it a letter you wrote to Sabrina after you killed her husband?
Though it's addressed to her, given its context, it's specifically written as a piece of exculpatory evidence, I guess you could say.
Sir, did you write this letter after you killed her husband?
I did.
Okay. You wrote this to Sabrina and you sent it to her right after you murdered her husband. Would that be accurate, sir?
No, sir. Sabrina arranged a day that I could meet her family. So, incidentally, it was to appear as if I was coming to offer my condolences, as if this was the first time I had heard about Robert's death, when in fact I had already been over to her house previously late at night. That day that I came, which she arranged for me to meet her family members, I brought this and a few gifts, I think some flowers and a few other little sympathy gifts, with the understanding that if one of her family members was to be curious about what was written, it would be appropriate for the occasion. There's a clear discrepancy between the words written here and what we've already heard in the wiretaps, pieces of evidence that have been previously testified to and conveyed. So there's this is a sympathy card written as a piece of evidence to convince a jury that we didn't plan the killing of her husband, when in fact we did plan the killing of her husband, and now we were, as previously planned, going about bringing our families together and getting to know each other, and this was just incidentally part of that.
Did you write this after you murdered her husband, sir?
Objection asked and answered.
You wrote this after you killed her husband. Is that right?
Objection asked and answered.
This is clear.
Did you write the following? If I have ever seen unconditional love, is what I watched in your eyes for Robert. Isn't that what you wrote, sir?
It appears to be.
So this was part of an elaborate plan between you and Sabrina to alleviate your involvement and her involvement. Is that right?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
I think you did, sir. So this was all a part of your master plan?
Our.
Sir, let me finish my question.
I
I
apologize.
know you want to say our plan, but this was part of the master plan to alleviate suspicion from you and Sabrina? Is that right?
Yes.
Now, by the time you gave this note to Sabrina, had you already written your apology letter to Jason Bernatine and his wife, Kelly?
Around that time. I don't recall if it was before or after this.
So you wrote an apology letter to somebody who already knew that you were involved in an extramarital affair with Sabrina. Is that right?
Yes.
Which immediately brought suspicion upon you, right?
I'm sure it didn't subtract from the suspicion that was already there. I can't speak to that it was the genesis of that suspicion.
Well, Jason Bernatine testified when he received that letter from you, he contacted Detective Meyer about that letter and talked about your involvement with Sabrina as a result of that letter you sent. Right?
I've not heard the testimony of Mr. Bernatine.
Would it be safe to say that sending a letter to someone who was already aware of your involvement with Sabrina and your relationship with her would raise suspicion in their mind that all of a sudden, out of the blue, after Robert's been murdered by you, that you're writing a letter apologizing to them? In your mind, don't you think that that would have immediately raised suspicion with regards to you?
Considering my current situation, I'm obviously no expert on avoiding suspicion. But I would say in that moment, I can tell you truthfully, Jason and Kelly were the only threat that Sabrina and I saw to our ongoing relationship, because they did have that knowledge that we had had an affair previously, or some sort of affair previously.
So you felt the need to write them an apology letter to re-raise those suspicions?
That was not the intent.
So that was the result.
Okay.
This time I move defense exhibit S. Good breaking point,
Everybody back at 10:45. Remember, former express any opinion or discuss the case. See y'all back at 10:45. back on the record in People v. Lamone. She's present in court with her attorney and the people are represented. We do have Mr. Hearn still on the stand, subject to cross by Mr. Terry. I'll call for Mr. Terry whenever you're ready.
All right, ask if we could have the clerk to open up the bag that's up there.
Mark next in order.
Exhibit T, marked next in order.
She is in Tango. Need a knife, Nancy? Smith, you want to take a peek at it?
This has got the actual screen and the shoe in it. Yeah, let's do that. Okay.
Got our, there are some contents in the bag. I'm just going to be asking if we flip those back into the inner bag.
No, check it.
Mr. Hearn, holding up what's been marked as Defense Exhibit T. Is this the backpack that you had your handgun with the silencer in when you shot Robert Lamone?
Could you bring it over here, sir?
Sure. I know your eyesight isn't all that wonderful.
It appears to be.
So if I understand from your prior testimony, you reached into this bag and had the silencers at the top end here, at the opening. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you had your hand in, were holding the gun and shot Mr. Lemone through the open end. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hearn, obviously, during the course of your relationship with Sabrina, you, throughout, as we've heard on the recordings and with the text messages, you were deeply in love with her. Would that be accurate?
I was very deeply in love with her.
And you were trying to build this perfect life with her. That was your plan, right?
I was planning a future with her.
Well, you had this almost obsession with being with Sabrina, didn't you? Right?
No, sir.
You didn't have an obsession for Sabrina? That you didn't have an overwhelming need to spend your life with Sabrina?
That would be a mischaracterization of my affinity for her.
Well, we heard constantly on the phone calls between you two of you that the police were intercepting your almost breathless love pronouncements. Would that be accurate for Sabrina?
The wiretaps, which only included November of 2014, after we planned her husband's death, certainly she and I responded in pretty unique ways, and I was definitely trying to be hopeful and hold on to a relationship, our relationship, and seems her response was maybe not the same, but that's a poor representation of the whole of our relationship. That was just wiretaps, and just from 1 month. And that leaves out all of the gifts she'd given me, all the advances she made on me, all the love letters she wrote me, all the... I'm not Mr. Smith, I'm not putting on his case, but there's certainly lots of nude photographs, things that she sent me, gestures she made my way, and made it abundantly clear to me by December of 2013 that she did want to continue her life with me. And at that time, she began to persuade me that she needed her husband dead.
Well, you had to be with her, which means her husband had to be gone, right? One way or the other, right?
What would be the other way, sir?
Well, if you divorced him,
And
certainly then you would be able to be with her, right?
And I discussed that with her.
And she basically was not going to divorce her husband, so that's when you decided he must die, right?
No, sir.
previously marked as People's Exhibit 68. Got a note you wrote, Mr. Hearn?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, got it.
Showing what's been previously marked as People's Exhibit 68. So, note you wrote, do you remember what date it was that you wrote this note?
I do not, sir.
You wrote the following: refusing God even while ill. Were you talking about Rob Lamone?
That is with reference to some things I heard about Rob Lamone, yes, sir.
And then, in fact, all of these bullet points relate to Rob Lamone, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Gave his wife away to another man to share the most passionate experience that humans can share together. Is that something you wrote?
Yes, sir.
And that was about Rob Lamone?
That was.
And you wrote, gave his wife away to other women. Is that something you also wrote?
I wrote the entire document, yes, sir.
Wants to have a threesome. Is that right?
I wrote that, if that's your question.
Okay. Not sure about the next one because my eyes aren't what they used to be. Views his wife as his... Did you write cum dumpster, sir?
I did, sir.
And then you wrote, and she's amazing. Is that right?
I did, sir.
And then you wrote, defy the living God. Is that right?
I did, sir.
And then you wrote, please kill him, God. Is that right?
I did, sir.
The note below that, again, this is a note. Is this a note you wrote after discussions with Sabrina?
You're asking pertaining to the entire document, sir?
Yes, sir.
The bullet points are things that Sabrina told me when I was asking her about how she felt about her relationship with Robert Lemone, her husband. The portion under that, well, with exception to what is put in parentheses, my own side note there, and she is amazing. The portion below that, as far as saying I love you, my vision has not changed, divorce, or wait for Rob to leave God's punishment. Those were notes of future conversations that I was hoping to have with Sabrina.
And the reference to David and Goliath?
I don't recall that right now, sir.
It doesn't seem consistent with the earlier parts where you're asking God to kill Rob, right?
I don't want to say that it wasn't part of that, but I don't recall at this time, Mr. Terry.
Wrote this note that you were deeply, in your mind, in love with Sabrina Limon.
Based on its content, I do believe it was after I had come to truly love Sabrina.
And this is long before you actually killed Rob Lamone, right?
As I said, I'm not exactly sure on the timing of it, sir.
Well, since you were asking God to kill him, I'm assuming it was before you decided to kill him, right?
I would agree that seems reasonable.
You were wanting to, you had this vision of this life that you wanted to build with Sabrina and her children. Would that be accurate?
It was our mutual desire, yes.
Well, certainly, in your mind, you had a view of what your idyllic life would be, right?
She prompted me to develop some of those ideas. I can't say that... well, for instance, Mr. Terry, we heard in the wiretap, she said, "Jonathan, you weren't even looking for a girl. Thank you for loving me. I know you weren't even looking for a girl, but thank you for loving me anyways." That would be a good characterization of the spectrum of my desires, or what I would consider an idyllic lifestyle, from the time I met her to the time ultimately that I killed her husband for her. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I wasn't looking for anything long term. However, I did come to love her. She's a very charming and sweet, thoughtful, energetic person. I was very magnetized to who she was and came to love her. But as we've discussed, it came to a point where she did clearly convey that she didn't want to carry on her life without me, and began to persuade me that for that to occur, her husband needed to be dead. So I'm not justifying the direction that the relationship went, but I went from not being interested to being very much in love to being willing to do something that I was very wrong to do.
But not reluctant to do, right?
I was reluctant to do it, sir.
Well, you're the one who went on the internet with a fake ID and bought arsenic trioxide, right?
I did.
You planned out a way to try to get Rob Lamone this poison to kill him. You did. Right?
Alone?
I know what you want to say, but you did that, right, Mr. Hearn?
I was just asking you to clarify your question, sir.
Sure, let me put it to you this way. Did Sabrina buy the poison?
No, I purchased
Did
it.
Sabrina make the pudding that you say that you supposedly gave to her?
No, I did.
Did Sabrina poison a helpless dog
No.
and kill it like you did?
As I said, I never confirmed that I killed the dog. But no, she did not do that.
And there's no way Sabrina would ever have poison in her house where her children could get at it, right?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Based on your knowledge of Ms. Lamone, she was a loving, caring mother, right?
Objection lacks foundation.
As to whether his belief she was a loving, caring mother, so
Vague as to time then.
I'm sorry.
Vague as to time.
During the time frame of your relationship with Ms. Lamone, you believe she was a loving, caring mother, right?
Generally speaking, yes, sir.
And would you agree that she is extremely protective of her children
Objection, speculation.
based on your observations and dealings?
with that addendum overruled.
I would not characterize her as extremely protective, sir.
Because she got involved with you?
We heard in the wiretaps that she said that her son told her she'd become a much better mother after she'd stopped drinking. So, I mean, I'm not judging her. I'm just saying there's always perhaps room for improvements.
Did you ever hear in those wiretaps her son saying, or her statements to the police where her son said she was not a good or protective mother?
I have not heard that the police said that she was a poor mother.
Or heard her say that, right?
Well, she loosely suggested that by her comments to me on the wiretaps, but I don't think she ever outright said she was a horrible parent. And I certainly wouldn't say she was.
So, purportedly, you're having all these conversations with Sabrina. You're having supposedly all these ideas to kill her husband. And you did so coldly and very calculated manner. Would you not agree?
That I killed him in a cold and calculated manner?
Yes, sir.
Certainly.
And never once in the time that you were involved with Sabrina did it ever come to your mind to say, oh, heck, no, I'm not doing this, right?
As I testified to having reluctance, yes, I did think that on a couple separate occasions, but something overcame those better judgments. Someone.
Are you saying Sabrina controlled you?
During what time, sir?
Well, I'm asking you, during this time that you're planning to kill her husband, she's in control of you?
With what respect, sir?
I'm trying to understand. You're the one who said that someone else convinced you to overcome your reluctance.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you saying Sabrina Limon was the one who controlled you?
On one level, certainly, I'm saying that. On another level, of course, I have free will. Of course, I'm a adult responsible for my own actions, and that's all.
Well, how did Sabrina overcome your free will to get you to murder her husband?
Mr. Terry, I could recite our story from the beginning of 2012, and that's not probably what you want to hear right now. Furthermore, it won't provide any logical basis for me doing something horrible that I did. The fact that I sinned in killing her husband cannot be pathologized. It cannot be made to make sense, because it is illogical. It is wrong. It was a horrible act, and I do live with the guilt and regret from that. However, as to how she influenced me, there's not enough time in the setting of this jury to describe the overt gestures of her love towards me that were very compelling and very convincing. Of the things, unfortunately, there's only been very, very few of them submitted into evidence, as far as, a few letters or texts. But the fact remains, we had a very sordid, ongoing affair for years, and she did play a very influential role in my life. I'm not using it as a justification, and also I want to be very clear that I'm not blaming her for doing something that I myself am responsible for. I'm not here to judge her. I'm only here to speak truth, sir.
That's for the jury to decide whether or not you're being truthful, sir.
Thank
right?
you.
And it's also your responsibility to answer my question specifically asked. What specifically did Sabrina Limon do from January to September of 2014 that overcame your free will, sir? And if you can't answer it, that's fine.
Well, maybe we'll start with the Valentine's Day letter that she wrote me, saying, I was made for you and you were made for me, on Valentine's Day of 2014. The same year that I know you're trying to report she had a good relationship with her husband. This is the same year that she was frequently pursuing me for rendezvous and getting together at my house or her house whenever opportunity presented itself. I'm not saying that an affair is akin to murder, but you already know the controversy and the trouble in me that I had in the first place of being with a married woman, and she overcame those better judgments. I would say it was a very systematic, slippery slope with her, all the way from 2012 in the beginning, when I began to withdraw, and she approached me emotionally, tearfully, and it truly kind of broke my heart at that time, as it did many times after that. Whenever I would go to sort of back away or withdraw from the relationship, it's difficult for me to describe, but I loved her.
And you've done anything for her?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. You'd have done anything for her.
It seems I did, sir.
Okay. You do things for her just because she filled a need you had, and with your relationship, she filled a need you had, right?
If you'll remember the emotional picture of me December of 2013, the context of that letter was, or the context of that time, why it was so emotional for me is because I had come to the conclusion that I would do whatever was best for her. At that time, I was willing to distance myself and separate myself from her if it would be what was best for her, essentially leaving the decision ultimately, I don't want to say in her hands, but with her best interest in mind. And so that time, the time I cried, when I hardly ever emotional, it had truly broken my heart, the thought of carrying on life without her, yet here I was willing to do what broke my heart for whatever was best for her. That was the foundation of a reunion with her that began all the plans for her, for me to kill her husband. It was at that time that she convinced me that she didn't want to go on living without me. She did want an ongoing relationship, sir.
Throughout 2+ years you were in custody, did you still continue to love Sabrina and want to be with her before you entered your plea?
If I could make this point abundantly clear, that I don't have a romantic love for her anymore, but I certainly do love her.
So as the time apart, as you became less enamored with her?
Much different kind of love now, so I guess you could say that entrancing, enthralling person I saw her as perhaps had to be compared with the truth of our relationship and what we'd accomplished through it.
It had nothing to do with the fact that in 2016 you were made aware that she was seeing someone you described as her former lover, Dale Smith, right? Had nothing to do with that. A sense of betrayal, perhaps?
You're asking if I still love her because she was with Dale?
No, sir, that's not what I asked.
That's what I'm asking.
My question is you remained silent from November of 2016 until January of 2017. And it wasn't until you became aware in 2016 that she was seeing Dale Smith again that you came forward. Would that be accurate?
Could you repeat that question?
Sure. You found out in 2016 that she was seeing Dale Smith again, her former lover, right?
I don't recall, sir.
Hearn, you remember testifying earlier this year at the preliminary hearing.
Oh, I do.
You remember you were under oath, much like you are here today.
I do.
Let me approach.
Yes.
I ask you to read, starting at line 18 to yourself through 21.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I refresh your recollection that you became aware in 2016 that Ms. Lamone was seeing Mr. Smith again.
As the question was posed in the prelim, sometime between November of 2014 and January of 2017, I became aware of that.
And you didn't feel, since you made this sacrifice for Sabrina, you didn't feel any sense of betrayal? Is that what you're saying, sir?
I had already gotten over those emotions long before, sir.
Now, I want to go over some of the items that the police found at your residence during the searches they did this year on January 3rd and I believe January 7th. First, on January 3rd, after they spoke with you, they went and searched your former residence and found the arsenic where you told them it would be. Is that right?
That's my understanding. I'm not sure.
Well, you had told them where to look, right?
Yes, I'm not exactly sure where they found it, though. I wasn't part of the investigation.
I understand that. Well, to your knowledge, had it been moved from where you originally hidden it?
Yes, sir.
It had been moved from where you had originally hidden it?
Yes, sir.
It had been moved from the paint bucket to somewhere else?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. So it was in a paint bucket. That's where you told them.
Yes, sir.
And that the paint bucket had been moved is what you found out later?
Slightly from where I thought it had been in the garage, based on my recollection.
And obviously other people had been in your former residence, which is on your grandfather's property, other members of your family. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I just rent the room, but the garage attached to it is all part of my grandpa's business and so forth.
Okay. Now, you'd had that poison from April, at least, of 2014. And it was still in the same location up until November of 2014 when you were arrested. Is that right?
Generally speaking, if you're speaking of in the garage, yes, sir. It was
Or in the bucket, even?
I placed it in the bucket sometime after August, sir.
So you'd had it in your residence inside your house from April until August?
No, sir, not in my house. I believe I testified previously that I bagged it up, maybe double or triple bagged it, and placed it in a very secluded part of the garage. However, after August, I seem to recall placing it in a paint bucket.
Now, you worked for the fire department at the time, right?
I did.
And it actually is normal for the fire department to handle and dispose of hazardous waste and poisons, right?
That was part of my job, yes, sir.
Okay, so it would have been very easy as a part of your job to get rid of that evidence. Is that right?
Not very easy, sir, just because arsenic is a pretty rare and highly toxic poison, and I just work on the collection side as far as collecting it from household hazardous waste materials from people. But I'm not one of the ones who would actually, I'm not a hazardous materials technician who would actually have to process and figure out where it came from and all that. So there would have been some sort of suspicious hoops I would have had to go through to dispose of it with my department, sir.
Well, you could have taken it into your apartment and had someone dispose of it for you. Would that be accurate?
Certainly, there's many ways that I could have gotten rid of it.
And in fact, wasn't April of 2014 poison abatement month with your department?
I don't recall, sir.
Now, you had that then from April until August, and then you say you move it at some point and hide it in a different location. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then you keep it from August until November before you're arrested. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you say that you began to suspect that the police were intercepting your calls to Sabrina, right? In
Yes, sir.
November of 2014.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you still hung on to the poison, right?
I consider that all the more reason to hold on to it. Yes, sir.
Well, were they going to be looking inside a bag that you're, say, taking to get rid of at your department containing the poison?
No, as I stated, if I took it to my department, then it would be more suspicious because a hazardous materials technician would have to process it. And
But it didn't have your name on it, though, right? It had your phony name that you put on it, right?
it would have.
Okay. And it didn't have your address on it, right?
The arsenic itself didn't. However, whoever's dropping it off would obviously be a person of interest.
But nobody knew at that point in time that you were planning on murdering Robert Limone by poison, right?
At that time, no, sir.
Okay. And with regards to the silencer and some of the clothing that you wore, you had that from August 17th or before that until November 18th when you were arrested, right?
Yes, sir.
And you allegedly knew that or suspected the police were listening in on your calls to Sabrina, right?
It was something I was suspicious of a few times, yes, sir.
But you never disposed of any of that evidence, right?
There were a number of things I didn't dispose of, sir.
And you had ample opportunity from the time that you killed Rob Lamone before you were even a suspect, or they began listening in on your calls in November, to dispose of those items, right?
I did, sir.
Okay, yeah, over 2 months, right?
More than that.
But you didn't.
I hid them instead quite effectively, sir.
That's right, because the police didn't find them the first time they searched your residence, right?
That's my understanding.
And if you hadn't told them where to go look, they would have never found them, right?
I can't speak for their investigation, sir.
Well, until you told them where to go to look, they hadn't found them, and you were set to go to trial shortly before you entered your plea. Or shortly after you entered your plea, you were set to go to trial, right?
Yes, sir.
agree that there are certain laws, if you will, that are set down in the Ten Commandments, are there not?
Certainly.
One of them is, thou shalt not commit adultery, right?
Objection, relevance.
Your Honor, it's relevant as to his state of mind and with regards to the conduct he was engaged in and his beliefs.
Give you very little leeway. Go ahead, Cal.
Thank you. Isn't that one of the commandments that you were taught from a very early age, sir?
I was taught the Ten Commandments, and yes, I'm familiar with that commandment that I broke, obviously.
And another one is thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, right?
Yes, sir.
You violated that one too, right?
Probably all 10, sir.
Well, certainly the big one in this case is thou shalt not kill. And you violated that commandment, did you not, sir?
Objection, relevance.
That's an answer. It's just that.
You killed Rob Lamone, right?
I did, sir.
And you violated that covenant, right?
The commandment, yes, sir. Yes, I violated that.
Despite all your beliefs, right?
Certainly, it was despite my beliefs, or, well, yeah, certainly it was despite my beliefs.
Yes. Smith, redirect.
Mr. Hearn, I want to start with May 23rd, 2014. Where were you traveling from?
From Seaside or Monterey, California.
And why were you in Seaside or Monterey?
For a arson investigation class.
How long did that class last?
I believe it was a few day class, a couple days.
So when you were traveling home, what was your initial travel route?
Mr. Smith, I apologize. I'm not super great on the Central California freeways. I don't remember if it was the 99 or the 5. I believe it was the 5. I was just going to head south, and then it had been my intention to head out east on 58 to come in sort of the back way to my area. However, not being real familiar with the freeways, I seem to have passed that and then turned back around to get back on the 58 to go back to where I live, sir.
Okay. That was my question. You made a statement about you turned around and went to Tehachapi.
Yes, sir.
Okay, what prompted that?
I had been on the phone distracted and just realized that I was approaching, the area just south of here. I want to say it's the Grapevine, something like that. And realized I was taking the wrong direction, and so looked on a map to see how to get back to the 58, sir.
Did you discuss with Miss Limon that you were going to Tehachapi at that time when you were at the Grapevine?
I did, sir.
What was the context of that?
I had told her prior to going to the class that either on the way up or on the way back that I would like to check things out in Tehachapi and see if I could locate the industrial building where Mr. Lemone worked. Incidentally, on the way up, I was running late and was unable to stop at all. So coming back down, I was speaking to Sabrina and just made it clear that I was going to try to locate the facility.
You were also asked about a firefighter party that occurred in 2012. Is that the same as the encounter at Beef O'Brady's?
No, sir. There was some other party planned that Sabrina had referenced, a Halloween party that she was going to be attending.
Okay. Halloween of what year?
2012, sir.
Okay. So when you were testifying as to a firefighter party that you were invited to by Sabrina Limon, that's from Halloween of 2012?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Correction, she was asking me if I was going to be attending that.
Okay. Now, the Beef O'Brady's encounter at March of 2013, how did you end up going to that encounter?
In one of our passing, well, none of our conversations were passing, but in one of our conversations, Sabrina mentioned that a local musician was going to be performing at Beef O'Brady's, who was a friend of her nephew, or her nephew knew about him or something, and so that she was going to be in the town I lived in. We live about 45 minutes apart, so she was going to be coming into my town a couple minutes from where I live and attending this conference, not conference, but a concert. And so at that time we had coordinated to meet up there when I realized the venue was just an open sort of venue and a bar and restaurant sort of thing. So that way it wouldn't seem too suspicious that I was there, and we sort of made it look like a coincidence, I guess you could say.
Now, in the planning leading up to the death of Robert Lemone, did you guys have it delineated who would plan what portion?
No, we were not that organized, sir. We would speak about ideas. We spent quite a bit of time together and on the phone, and so we would speak about some of our ideas, or email, or just when we're visiting, talk about some of our ideas, and then sort of go from there.
The information that you had about Robert's relationship with his wife Sabrina, where did that come from?
Sabrina exclusively. Correction, with one exception to one time when Jason Bernatine told me something about Rob loving his wife and so stay away from her kind of thing. So that's the only other person I've heard information about their marriage from.
You're asked a lot of questions about what you did in pursuing Sabrina. What did she do in pursuing you at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014?
From the very start, she was a very charismatic person, very endearing, and sort of has this reserve of optimism always, and just a real magnetism about her. But on top of that, and so that was unique. I haven't found that to be so in many women I've been around or dated. So that was already something that she knew I was very fond of, just her personality. But on top of that, she was very thoughtful. She'd purchase gifts for me appropriate for, say, if I was going out of town or to teach at a conference or something like that. She would package me a couple of gifts, a nice card, some just thoughtful things. She'd, of course, remember my birthday, just gifts, letters. I said advances earlier, but essentially she made it very clear that she really enjoyed my company and expressed to an increasing degree over time that her life at home was becoming more insufferable. But, I mean, examples escape me now, but everything from, for instance, when we were discovered the first time, our relationship was discovered the first time by Rob, and he broke her phone and had chewed me out over the phone. It was that next day, I believe, she walked by herself over to her parents' house to use their landline to reinitiate conversation with me. So there's these little things, I might say advances, but it shows through her behavior and her antics, that, as well as her words, that she was very adamant about pursuing an ongoing relationship with me. I know you didn't use many photographs or didn't publish many photographs, but that's something that on a weekly, if not daily basis, there was the exchange of provocative or ordinary, but many provocative photos. So I guess the totality of all these gestures led me to really believe that she had a similar affinity for me that I had for her, sir.
You asked a lot about your beliefs. What allowed you to overcome your beliefs and kill Rob? I'm still working through that, Mr. Smith. I'm not sure I have a comprehensive answer for you. I certainly see that I was blinded. I was involved in a situation I never should have been, and so exposed to some frustrations that belonged to Sabrina that I never should have known about. I was included in dealing with the burden of some of her personal burdens that I don't think I had any business being involved in. And but when she made it clear that she wanted to be with me, those things, I inherited her frustrations, and so I guess it was just a really bad concoction of love for her, devotion to her, and a lot of blindness, a lot of selfishness and sin, and a lot of selfishness, and essentially as twisted as this sounds, and I hate to say this, but by the time I killed Robert, I believed that it was what was ultimately best for Sabrina, because she had led me to believe that, sir.
You were shown People's 68. Zoomed in on that second to last portion that you wrote. I love you. My vision has not changed. Divorce or wait for Rob to leave. I wanted to ask you about why you put that in the singular, where you put my versus our vision has not changed. Do you recall?
Specifically to writing that note, I'm not sure that I can definitively say so, sir.
At some point when you were going through what you described as conflict, was this your vision that you had in your relationship with Sabrina, that there be a divorce or you wait for Rob to leave?
That was certainly a more favorable, more appealing option for me than how it ultimately turned out, sir.
Okay. So what changed from when you wrote this, where you described your vision, which would have been divorce or waiting for Rob to leave, to where you and Sabrina ultimately decided what ended up being the death of Robert?
You know, sir, I hold pretty strongly to good liberal values, and I don't appreciate male chauvinism or controlling nature of relationships, things of that nature. As I got closer to Sabrina, as I said earlier, she, in this time frame of this being written, she was describing what was becoming a increasingly insufferable living condition with Robert, expressing his emotional abuses and a number of bullet points I think we're all familiar with now. So I will admit I am someone who tends to probably be more sensitive to the needs of the marginalized and those who are underappreciated or those who are attempted to be controlled by others. And so I was probably somewhat quick with my frustrations in that respect. But the fact that I started off desiring a relationship with her, I was looking for a marriage and an ongoing relationship. As we see on the screen, it would be appealing to me if they had gone through a divorce or something of that nature. And with increasing fervency, she did convince me, and I became convinced that ultimately it would be what was best for her kids, for the whole situation, if Robert were to be dead.
All right, we'll take our lunch recess there. Remember not to form or express any opinion or discuss the case. See you all back at 1:30.